Call policy and governance meeting to order. Roll call, all three districts are represented. Notice the meeting was properly posted April 8th, 2022. Entertain a motion to approve minutes of March 29th. I heard a yep and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Well, probably the most painful thing of the day. Karen, present VOCC employees of the month of April.
Thank you, ma'am.
We only had 3 nominations this month.
Did that include the rollover from last month?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
I'll make a motion to nominate options C and B to present to the Board of County Commissioners.
We have a motion for options B and C and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, guys.
That was difficult.
Discussion and review of possible action regarding renovation of office spaces, DHS.
Good morning.
Hello, Jamie.
Hi. Your agenda had an attachment. I don't know if you have a copy of that with you, do you?
It's on.
Okay.
It's on there, yeah.
So DHS would like to get the county's approval to proceed with an architectural building, an actual plan that they could bring back for final approval to renovate their space on the 3rd floor, and they'll pay for it all. Their plan is to renovate that space, keep the same amount of space that they have now on the 3rd floor, and then totally vacate the 4th floor because they're still having lots of people work from home and they're going to continue that model. I've given you an estimated timeline. I'm bringing their facilities management director with me to the infrastructure meeting April 25th so that that committee can ask some specific questions, express any concerns, whatever. And I've shown you, you currently have the first 2 pages of that handout of the floor plans are their current space, and then all they have right now is just the concept model. They don't want to spend the money on the architectural plans if the county isn't going to approve them to proceed. So it looks like if everything went on time and there were no supply issues or anything like that, which we all know that'll happen, that they would be vacating the fourth floor in January of '24. But of course, if this gets approval from all the people and continues to go forward, then I'll keep you updated on how that timeline is probably changing. It'll probably be pushed out longer, would be my guess.
And then if we got to that point, then the fourth floor would be at that point completely empty.
Yes, there's 30,918 square feet up there of office space, and we'll have to clean it up, obviously, but it's a lot of space. It will change the revenue if you just look at the rate now. Once that happens, from 481,000 to 181,000. But that's a nice big space up there, so I'm thinking that the county could most likely lease that.
Are there currently partners that you would consider that would expand up there, or we just, we're starting with a fresh slate?
It'd be, in my opinion, probably a fresh slate. I don't know anybody that could occupy that much space, just little pockets of people, so. But once construction starts, should it start, someone may contact me that I hadn't even thought of, so
Sure.
keep you informed. So I'm not asking for any approval. I'm just letting each group know as the meetings are scheduled. They will also attend the BOCC meeting with me on May 2nd to discuss with the commissioners the plans, what they would like to do. And so I'm just starting here.
Hey, Joe, can you call Rachel Holt and see if she needs some office space so we can rent the fourth floor to her?
Are there any questions or anything at this point?
I don't think so.
Sounds good.
Oh, you can turn them on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a motion to receive
Second.
and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All right, item 4, discussion and possible action regarding overview of program and Arpa, program governance, funds request and authorization process, funds management, and subrecipient management with Accenture. And welcome.
Morning, gentlemen. Steve and I are here. We're going to switch this over. Yeah, there we go. You received this on Friday. We sent it to you individually. There have been some very slight cosmetic edits since then. So this is the freshest one. We just made sure to send in, so you'll have that. It should be before you now. Oops. Is it? There we go. Sorry, it might be on a slight delay. Here we go. So Steve and I, we want to concentrate on number 2 and 3, but just want to give a very quick overview of where we are and some of the questions that you all have asked. Well, where should I aim this because it's slightly delayed? I'm sorry. Okay, all right, next, go ahead, next slide then. I'm going to very briefly go over the beginning of this. We agreed with you all that we would help provide planning and oversight, administration of your allocation of Arpa funds. So what we're going to talk about today is really the first of those bullets first, how you all want to respond to programs that you want to invest in through your Arpa allocation, and then what steps we can do on the front end to make sure that all of those monies are in compliance as they're spent, as they're allocated, the reporting requirements, the KPI requirements, those sorts of things. Go ahead, please. Just as a quick reminder for everybody, these are the 4 categories we've talked about with you that are permissible, broad-based, permissibly spendable for SLFRF to respond to the public health emergency and to respond to the negative economic impacts. For essential work during the COVID-19 period and the ARPA operational period or performance period, which ran from the bill's passage last March until the end of 26, calendar year 26. For government services, provision of government services that may have been affected broadly because of the pandemic, and then for necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So that's just a level set as we go forward with a plan on how you might consider expenditures. Yes, please. Forward. Yep. So we reviewed this, but this puts it in a very concrete form. These are the expense categories that are permissible under ARPA. So public health is straight away, negative economic impacts, disproportionately impacted communities, services that get provided to those. That could be housing, that could be education, it might be childcare, premium pay, investments in water, sewer, and broadband, revenue replacement, which you spoke about at your last meeting. That's the one-time allocation that the federal government allows under the final rule. That can be either $10 million or via a counterfactual calculation that can go to any government service, and then administrative costs and expending it. So these are the broad categories under which every expense that you all finally approve, or the commissioners finally approve, they have to fit in the reporting. Please, next. Okay, so now we want to get into, with that background, what you've asked us to do is come back with a way that your potential allocations, potential expense decisions can be thought about, can be evaluated, can be assessed, and how that information flows from you all to us, and then us back to you, and eventually the county commissioners. So, Stephen?
Yep, thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Stephen LaChance with Accenture. So one thing to point out at the onset here is that we have a small set of open questions as it relates to this process, and we want to design it and develop it with you all, not just forcing it upon you. So one thing you'll notice here at the top of the pyramid is the Board of County Commissioners, and we weren't sure if that should be BOCC or another group like the Budget Committee, et cetera. So just noting one of the few questions that we have to work through with you. But as Chris alluded to, this is illustrating the flow of directives and escalations, as well as decisions and recommendations. So you can see where on the right side we have a portfolio of projects, a portfolio of proposals. Those flow up into this committee, the Policy and Governance Committee, and in turn can flow up to the BOCC. And in return, the BOCC, being the decision-making body, will provide back decisions and ad hoc directives for the program that might be outside of the process we're defining here. By the way, feel free if you need to stop us for questions or commentary at any point. So we can go to the next one. So I won't drain this slide necessarily, but just going into more detail about the responsibilities at each level. So again, at the top, the BOCC providing oversight and decision-making authority, and that flowing down into the Policy and Governance Committee, which in turn would flow down into the PMO body or our team. So we'll administer the projects and the information gathered from those projects, roll those into reports, and those will flow upward toward the BOCC. Okay.
And before Stephen begins, this is the crux now of what we're talking about, how the identification of those opportunities and proposals, how we'll propose to evaluate them and get the information back to us. Part of the question that we'll have here is, how do you want this process to run on the center of the top line, the submission of proposals? Who's doing so? How will that information come in? Will it be via district? Will it be via department head? Will it be via the public? Will it be a combination of those? But that's the general purpose of this slide. Go ahead, Stephen. Sorry about that.
Yep, that's right. And to that same point, the mechanisms for receiving that information is another open question we have. So is it a form that they fill out online and email to us, or is it a web form that they can submit through there? And we can work that out with you and your IT department, whatever's easiest and most simple. So submitting forms, it'll flow into our PMO. We'll triage the proposals, give kind of a first take on is this eligible? Does it meet the criteria? Does it have the information that we need to conduct federal reporting and compliance, et cetera? We'll inventory those proposals and have those sort of roll up to this group, the P&G committee, to evaluate and prioritize. And then the P&G committee can in turn make a recommendation to the BOCC or the decision-making authority to authorize use of funds ultimately.
Do you currently have forms or some sort of application process that you're using elsewhere that we could mirror? Or
Yeah, and we've done it a few different ways and with different clients. So, in some cases, it's just bare bones rudimentary. It's a Word document that they fill out and email over to us. And, depending on the scale of how many projects we're dealing with, that's perfectly fine. Others are more sophisticated. They might have a web form that, has all the required fields and everything that they have to go through.
And in just a second, it might be the very next slide, but you don't have to go there now. But we'll show you an example yeah, exactly. And really, it's just where y'all tell us what's the easiest way, because if we're talking about submission via district, it might be something more simple, like he said, like a Word document that just gets attached to an email. It comes in and has all the requisite information. But if it's a wider call for possibility or for proposals, then just managing that inventory might militate toward using an online, something we develop really quickly with the IT department and have people go. The point is, it can go either way. It can go in any of those ways, whatever works better or best for the county.
So I think if memory serves, we utilized a web form last time under the CARES, correct? That people could just access that website and submit the form, and then it would go. At that point, I think it went maybe to BET or Cody and the BET. So that would change. But we did have a form last time, so we could compare the two. And I'm in favor of the not via a district model. I would prefer that all of the submittals for assistance be sent to one location and then filtered through you all for possibility, make sure they meet criteria, et cetera, and then on up to us. And if we need to discuss that later, but at this point in time, I'm not interested in receiving those into District 1 and then forwarding them on to you. I think it should be a county-wide singular process.
And can you go ahead and really, one more, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. Keep going, right there. And so, sorry, but since we're on this is somewhat different than CARES, right? The criteria that are necessary for ARPA expenditures. Some of these are not depending on the direction that the committee wants to go, are not necessarily going to be appropriate. But these are all the information sets that we'll need, particularly at the end, to be able to track for reporting, KPIs, expected outcomes, those sorts of things. So you'll see it's very straightforward. What's the name, who's sponsoring it, contact information, organization, amount requested. You would expect all that. Then what we've seen, and Miles, to your question, what we've seen on the bottom left-hand corner there, some jurisdictions are asking those who are submitting to say, tie this back to something the county's doing, right? Give us what this budget priority is. Tell us why the county should invest in this, and it meets with our fill in the blank, our mission, or whatever it might be. That's something that some jurisdictions are doing. Then what the proposal is, right? What expense category does it fit in? We would obviously not just check that and double check that and triple check that. That would be our role, but we go ahead and put that on there and let it. If somebody has a proposal, we would like to know what expense category they think it fits in, because maybe we're missing something, right? The problem statement, the objective, the timeline is critical, because all of these funds have to be encumbered by the end of calendar 24, liquidated by the end of calendar 16. So we want to make sure that their timeline is compliant, so that the county would be compliant when it sends there. And then a few other things around the KPIs and required metrics, which are requisite to most expense categories within ARPA. How will they measure success? We don't want to forward to you anything for your consideration if the potential proposal itself doesn't spell out how they're going to define success, because you all are ultimately responsible for that, for where you send the money. So sorry for skipping ahead, but these can be built into whatever, a web, Joe, to your point, built into a website, built into a web portal, et cetera, with better descriptors as people are going in and filling it out. So yeah, thank you for, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. And that speaks to just the flow of information and, working from the end backwards almost, where this is what we need for federal compliance reporting, and getting that as much as that information up front as possible, and then clarifying it throughout the process, so that by the time we get to federal reporting, it's ready to go and we can ship it off. Okay.
And sorry, one thing, I would also think there on this workflow, everything that's kind of on the left 2/3, that's really phase one of this whole process, right? Getting the proposals in, inventoried, evaluated, considered, and ultimately decided. And then once that decision is made by the commissioners, essentially it comes back to us, right? For the phase two, which is the compliance piece, the spend, report, monitoring, making sure you all are in compliance with what the federal government requires on quarterly and annual reports. And then whether it's a contractor, a subrecipient, or a beneficiary, whatever they are, they're doing whatever is required under ARPA for their part of the reporting mechanism.
Okay.
Yeah, and here we point you back to what we put originally several months ago. The strategic planning and implementation. We're talking about the implementation design here, but Joe's one of the things that mentioned of a question you just had, and looking at some of those categories that were on the potential field population. We can work with the county if they so chose to say we are considering proposals in these categories, right? A strategic plan, right? So it's not 1,000 different things that come in and 1,000 different things that aren't responsive, but we would have to respond to them anyway, right? That would not be appropriate because some people may not fully understand what ARPA can and cannot be used for. So we would want to put up some guideposts, some fencing around whatever mechanism you all choose to make sure that people truly understood here are the kinds of things that are permissible to come in, and so tailor your proposal, tailor your request that way. Next slide, please. Okay.
And to that, I think that was the purpose of, in the last meeting, us asking you all to take a look at what those projects might be relative to the county, the board's statutory authorities, as well as those of our beneficiary trusts.
Right.
So for instance, OIA, which last time did our economic development piece, County Home Finance Authority, which was able to do rental assistance and mortgage assistance. Of course, there was the Criminal Justice Authority. And am I leaving anybody out, Miles, in terms of our trust? I can't. We've got several, but
trust. Yes, I mean we've even got a water board
yeah,
trust.
but last time those three were the principal trusts that were involved with the CARES. And so as far as determining what those programs might be, you all researching that, telling us what we might be able to do within those broader 5 categories that you outlined earlier.
Yeah.
And then us making some decisions based
Specific
on
to those trusts.
To the trust and or the county. We have a human services department, social services department, what they might be able to do with regard to food assistance, homelessness, et cetera. Just
Understood, but at the broad level, and then looking at what other jurisdictions are doing too. I think would that be helpful to you all?
Well, it would be helpful, but municipalities have much greater flexibility in this than we do. Now, taking a look at what other counties are doing, it would be beneficial. Yes.
Understood.
Well, and to that, Oklahoma City, they've got $78.5 million to replace revenue loss $37 million for economic impacts and $7 million for public health. So, I mean, they've got 3 categories, and that's what they're going with. They actually have 122.5 million to work with, where ours is 154 million.
Next slide. We've already talked about this one, I think. So in this, just to refresh, when a request does come in, though, no matter what the final mechanism is, this is sort of how we'll work through it. We'll always start with what the federal requisites are. If it's, here's what's required, and it's got to meet that, period, full stop. If it doesn't, then we'll go back to them and ask for clarification, or we'll just forward it to you all and say, this does not fit, and there's not a real good way to make it fit. And then we can go to those sets of other things, urgent need priorities, if it fits within other county budget or principles or other county priorities. This is very common with our clients. We start with what the federal government says and then just fit it into, after that is a yes-no gate, we fit it into as a means of prioritization or triage. Does it fit into these sorts of things? Because the purpose of this is when you have, I'm just going to use an example, I have no idea if this would happen, but let's just presuppose for a moment, you open a door and you get $300 million worth of proposals. And of those $300 million, 250 million of them are, they meet federal requisites. Well, you've got 154 million in your ARPA allocation. So now you've got to have a set of criteria that's going to take that 250 down to 154. And so the latter third of those, or excuse me, the latter 3/4 of that on the screen would be how you all triage those as a group to get down to what might be appropriate to pass up for ultimate decision by the commission. Okay, next. Oh, yeah, please.
Just to add, these are our kind of our top level recommendations too. So when something is taken into the process, this would be an assessment that the PMO can do as a checklist, just to say, okay, it meets these criteria and it doesn't meet these, and therefore we'll pass it on to the P&G committee or not. Okay, and then the kind of just the format, we don't have to spend a lot of time here, but the format in which you can receive a roll-up of these reports or expenditures or projects. So we roll them into these portfolios. So we have one for proposals, one for projects, where we're tracking the expenditures, and again, maintaining that flow of information so that it's consistent throughout the process and will ultimately lead to the federal reporting.
So once you all approve the framework and the direction, this is what you'll begin to get once the projects proposals begin to roll in. And then I think you said, I don't know, but the gold is when it turns into an actual project. So it's two different reporting streams. The blue is the proposal that y'all will look at and make a cut line decision, right, or ask for more information, goes up for adoption. The gold is when it's approved by the county to spend, what we will begin to track, and that's how that report will flip, and you'll get a different report. So there will be a point in time where you're receiving both of these reports, right? When we're still in the proposal and you still have money in the 154 million to allocate, but there are already projects out the door. And then this is just a reminder, again, as Stephen said, we don't have to drain it, but for those that are those allocations that you approve that are capital expenditures, they require a much more thorough, much more in-depth justification than do just your regular programs and services. So we will be asking for and looking for additional things. There's a threshold, there are 3 spending thresholds related to capital expenditure projects. And then beyond that, there are an additional set of questions that have to be asked and an additional set of reports that have to be a more complete written justification based on the expense level, and then whether or not that expense is enumerated as eligible in the final rule or is not enumerated as eligible in the final rule, as to what becomes the written justification for that. But that's something we'll work with you if a capital expenditure comes in that proposal process and the board moves forward with it. This is the process we'll work through to get it justified in writing. And then the final couple of things here, and then open it up for questions. Just as a reminder, this is your reporting schedule. We will keep this front and center at every time we speak with you in the reports that we put. So the ones in blue are your quarterly reports. The next one's due at the end of this calendar month, April, and then your annual report is due at the end of July. So after your fiscal year ends, you have a month then to put your report together. So it's due at the end of July. Do you want to talk about the bottom right?
Yeah, just one thing to call some attention to in the bottom right there, you can see where one of the open questions we have is how will our process in tracking the financials fold into or interface with the county's existing budget process and systems. So if we need to create an interface there, that's where we would do that.
Right. I think there's, and then the last two are just a reminder that in all of this entire process, from proposal to approval to reporting and compliance, we will monitor and work with whatever the agency department, whatever the outside organization is, whatever it might be on this KPI work, which is required, and it's something that has to be tracked through the entire performance period of ARPA, so that goes all the way to the end of 2026. Which is why we're emphatic with making sure we have that on the front end, because if you, the county, can't show that the mandatory KPIs and programmatic data are going to be available to the federal government, then I would say it would be a questionable expense in the first place. So this is something we'll do, and then the same thing on the next one. If in fact one of your expenditures falls into the subrecipient category, as opposed to a contractor, as opposed to a beneficiary. So it's a subrecipient carrying out the work of a federal program or a statutory program on your behalf. Then I know it's hard to read. That thing on the right-hand side is taken straight from the final rule. It is all the questions that have to go into and be asked and answered based on subrecipient management. Obviously, we'll help handle that. We're not at that point yet. It's just something to remember with KPIs that if somebody becomes a subrecipient under the rule, then there's an additional set of reporting requirements we'll have to deal with. Okay, so and then there's just some additional information that's available for you. So that's the report, and we're ready to go on the proposal intake. The big open question for the committee is how do you want it done? Like how do you want the process to work?
All right, so earlier on, we were talking about, I think it said in here, some ongoing agenda items. So I was thinking perhaps what we do is on page, what would it be? It's this expenditures category slide.
Mm-hmm.
If we could refer to that. Perhaps what we do is an agenda item that would deal with each of those 7 items each time you're here before us, and language being something to the effect of discussion possible action to receive an update on proposed or ongoing projects and programs to be undertaken by the BOCC or beneficiary of trust thereof related to public health, and then including but not limited to the mental health, substance abuse, health, and safety. Is that sufficient in your eyes?
Because any proposal that comes in, we will categorize them as one of the 7 straight away.
That's what I was thinking. So
exactly.
you would begin to categorize in there.
That's right.
We would be able to see what requests are coming in.
That's right.
And then you all would review either the trust or our statutory authority to see if it's even possible to do, and then we can move forward there.
Right. Because the way that proposal organization document will work, the one in the blue as opposed to the gold, is it will be organized by these. So it would essentially just be going down that list by the category that's permissible. Because when we go in for reporting, among the very first things at the very top of the reporting is where does it fit? What category does it fit under?
Okay. All right.
Are we singularly placing each item, or okay?
Yeah. So there, it is entirely possible that an expenditure may fit under two classes, but it's kind of like answering an SAT question where it says, which of these is the best option, right, for it to fit under?
Are you all comfortable in having those 7 things as a standing agenda item? If so, I will forward the suggested language to them with your consent.
I'm fine with that.
I think that's
Okay, all right. So I'll send you some suggested language and then, okay, all right.
That answers that question. I think for us, the larger question is, how do you all want the intake process to work?
And, well, like I said earlier, I think we put a form up on our website that, and I like the information that you all requested there. You take those in, you review them to meet whether or not they meet within those 7 categories and our authority or the trust authority. And then if they don't, I'm comfortable with them replying back that they don't meet the established criteria. If they do meet the established criteria, then forwarding those to us for consideration and then on possibly to the BOCC.
So in that process, if I submitted to you a proposal that gets kicked back, you say it doesn't fall under one of the 7 categories, what rebuttal do they have to come back? And are you going to ask them for more information? Are you kind of yellow lighting it and saying, yeah, there might be, if you'll...
Right.
So that's my only question there is I'd kind of like to know what's being submitted.
Well, now, I'm sorry. You will, even if something is said
No
to,
you're
there'll
still
be
going to get
there'll
it
be
to
a
us.
report with that.
Okay.
I mean, it'll be here are the 43 things that
Perfect.
that we and the outlying reason would be the final rule says on page 173 you can't do this. This is what we told them.
Okay.
And there may be situations. I don't want to give an example that would seem like it's official here, but there may be something where someone comes in because of the complexity of the rule and they say, this is what we propose. And they're and I mean this respect, they're just looking at it wrong, right? That like if they turn around the lens 180, it would be, well, this is explicitly written in the in the final rule. So change your language, or are you comfortable? Can you change your language this way? And would it be true and accurate?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I was wanting to know with each one of them that comes in. A report to us in some way, shape, or manner. If they were to shape their ask this way, they could be qualified. So,
and
okay.
if we consider them disqualified and give you, even before we get to that point, that's why the role of the project sponsor is so important, or the proposal sponsor, I should say. So we have someone to work with and engage to work through those issues when, like, if we're in a yellow light, as you said.
But even if we red light them, Miles, to your question, y'all would get a report of those, right? And the reasons why it didn't fit. And Joe, we are very, to answer or not to respond to what you said, we're very happy to work under any system that y'all tell us to work under in terms of if it's a web-based, who's going to get access to the URL, how to, all of those sorts of things. That's a decision we can't make, but we're ready to go whatever y'all tell us to do.
I think just to help think through that, I was thinking about, like, who do you want to open this up to? If it's the broader public, then something a little more sophisticated like a web form would be better. If it's a tighter group, you know.
I don't mean to interrupt, but, and this might be my interpretation and it might be wrong, but as I'm reading all of this, the intent of this money is for the broader public. And that's why I think putting it out onto the website and allowing anyone the opportunity that believes they fit within the criteria to apply is in the best interest of all. But I'm one person out of
Understood. The only comment I would make to that is if you do that, I would respectfully suggest you time box it.
Okay.
And say, otherwise it would be rolling, and which is okay, or either time box the tranches. Say we're going to accept proposals for $40 million worth of money right now, right? And then we may come back in calendar 2023 and look at another. Again, I'm just representing to you what other jurisdictions have done, states and local governments. But put some parameters on it so that there's some certainty to the process.
I think that's wise.
So do they, similarly with what you're talking about, so we open it up to the public, we open it up to everybody. So triaging it, clearly we want to help ourselves before we can help others, because if we can't help ourselves, then we can't help everybody else. Is that the way that it's worked everywhere else, that everybody puts in all at once and then you just sort through it after you do the closure date? Or is there some other method that they're doing, look within first and then look outside?
Where I have seen this process work most commonly is they take their total pot of money and divide it into subpots of money.
Okay.
And they say, for our, and I'm going to use your word, our internal needs, right, quote unquote, whatever they may be, we're going to think of half the money, right? We're going to take, in this case, $77 million. And we're going to say, we're going to set that aside for county needs as determined by the county. And then we're going to take the remainder of the money and divide it into two pots. And one is for projects related to community fill in the blank improvement, home. I mean, just give a whole list of things. And one might be related to infrastructure projects. Again, I'm just giving examples. And they'll say, you fit into those. So they create some space on the front end by doing some surgery on the big pot of money and say, this is it, rather than just pushing, pardon the expression here, but pushing all the chips to the middle of the table and seeing who else will ante up into the pot, right? That's where it's commonly, what I see most commonly. Even in my home state, at the state level, that's the way it was done, where the state reserved a substantial amount of the money for its needs determined by the state and the legislature. And then they had, I think it was 3 or 4 committees, if you will, that were, one was around broadband, one was around human services, et cetera, and they accepted applications that way.
So, to me, it's almost arbitrary. We're setting aside $50 million for the county. By going ahead and getting this website set up for submittals, I mean, we haven't even identified all of our own internal needs at this point. So going ahead and setting up this website and opening it up for possible uses by the greater public would seem to help us be able to identify how much we might need to set aside in each of those 7 areas, as opposed to us saying, okay, we want $100 million for Oklahoma County. Well, we don't know. Now, of course, we could later revise that, but I think by getting the website up and running and accepting proposals, we get an idea of the need, and we're able to really refine what it might be, say, to go to, homelessness, what it might be for mental health assistance. And I think, on the website, obviously, there would be a statement, submittal of a proposal does not guarantee funding, blah, 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 blah. So that, we can't force people to read it, but that we're covered in that there is no expectation you're going to be funded.
We can't force people to read it, but I would suppose, unless there's something about your own county ordinances or state law, I don't know, I would suppose that we could work with your council's office and put language that is a checkbox that you have to affirmatively check upon submitting and saying, this is not
right
the non-guaranteed language.
Even though they don't read it, they check it just so they can see it.
But they have taken the affirmative action
of
doing that, right? And checking that box and saying, I will say, so to your point, Joe, I mean, when we've seen this in other jurisdictions, I think 2 or 3 things are likely to happen. You will get some clarity around quantification of some issues, maybe some you didn't even think of. I'm not in the predicting business, but if I were in the predicting business, I would also say you would get some number X of the 154 that you've got, because most jurisdictions see a substantial X factor from what they've got. So it's a lot of project requests come in.
Right.
Now, Miles, to your point earlier, in a lot of jurisdictions, when they go through them, there's a substantial chunk of those are cut the line, and they just will not pass the criteria. They do. Oh, it's not up there, but they will not pass the criteria. That great projects, but they don't pass what the criteria was under the final rule that the federal government put out. But then there will be a substantial number that then comes into the harder point of choosing between the good and the also good projects.
So with that, the projects that don't fall under, are we going to examine whether or not they fall under the SLRF or the infrastructure or any of the other?
Well, let's take those one by one. It's doubtful that I don't know any finding accounting was doubtful. Even if you had CRF left, they would have qualified for that. Let's just put that one off to the side. There may be other parts of ARPA aside from SLFRF that they could potentially fall under. I'm putting that with a big asterisk and a big caveat. But IIJA is an interesting one for infrastructure because the federal government is just now starting to roll itself up into getting that information out, the amounts that are coming, what the guidance is going to be out to, if it's going to local governments or if it's going to go to state governments as a pass through to locals, and what those splits are going to be. So if it's an infrastructure project, it's like we all shared with y'all on the water sewer category. There are many jurisdictions that are stepping back and saying, well, unless we just have an absolute critical need to spend ARPA money, SLFRF, on broadband, water, sewer, we're not going to do it because there's all this IIJA funding that's coming down that we are likely going to get a substantial amount to do these projects. So if we're not living in critical land, we're going to hold off on that and put our ARPA dollars elsewhere. So if we get something that comes through that's an infrastructure proposal, I mean, then obviously we would note it as that in the categories, but it may very well be that if it's a no for this, there may be additional federal funding coming down. And I say that with humility, don't know the answer to that, but it's something we would track.
Yeah. Not here one day to the next. Sometimes it's coming straight to us. Sometimes it's going to ODOT and into us. So, right.
And we've heard, I don't know.
Similar, yeah.
And the reason I stutter with that is we hear one thing and then the next and then the next. So I don't know.
Right.
And it could very well be, Miles, that some pots of money may come directly and other pots of money for X purpose may go through the state, right? We just don't know.
Anything else?
Yeah, so we're looking at a theory of a template for an application, working with IT to get that on the page at some point. Would that be an item recommended to BOCC, or is that something that, an application based on all the questions they had to answer? And my first thought was to initially roll that out to offices and departments within the county as a first run type of thing, knowing that there's some offices and departments, even in this room, that are asking for dollars sooner than I know we can get it to them. But also in that, in CARES Act, they referenced no double dipping. So if my project is Main Street, Oklahoma City, but Oklahoma City has monies, is that an item that we have to recommend they send that to them? Or if they don't send it to them or won't send it to them, they're just asking from us?
Yes, and we would look at that on a case-by-case basis, because that rule around double dipping for instance, in ARPA, there's actually incentivized regional cooperation for projects within the language of the rule itself. And so it's not as, draconian's not the right word for what CARES did, but it's not as structured and strict around those things. So we would just look at that at a case-by-case basis. I do like, with respect, from our vantage point, I think it would not take long with your IT folks. We've got the criteria to build this out. But I do like the idea, respectfully, of opening up the county departments first for this reason. It allows us to beta test the form before if you all chose it to go live, and to see if there's some bugs or some things that we would need to look at if we're not getting the information correctly, if the response is not going out. But do that in a real scenario, and then if you open the curtain up and have the distribution wider, time box it in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6, whatever time box you as a committee agree to, for those proposals to come in.
So is that your?
So back to that form then, there would be another question. Have you submitted this proposal to
Elsewhere.
XYZ level? Have you received information that you will be approved, et cetera? If so, how much?
Because I would imagine there are some that'll come in that wouldn't be necessary to Oklahoma City, but most definitely to the state of Oklahoma. I would imagine there would be some who have done that because of how many responses they got.
And along with working with IT to get, you had mentioned previously about our financials, as we're working to set up this form, also get with them, and then I would imagine the clerk's office regarding the Munis system that we utilize. So can you guys help them out with that as well? Okay.
Communications too, it's on the list, but if there are existing communication channels that we can leverage to get the word out, and if we're talking about setting parameters, how do we communicate that? So we can help with the messaging, but the mechanisms and the channels we want to work with you on.
And then when the applications are available, my fear is we're going to get stuff from Utah and Connecticut on how they're going to produce something here in this community. My first blush is if it's not coming from a source in Oklahoma County, they're not truly part of that Oklahoma County family.
So the way we'll run that is I think there's a parameter on there. You don't have to go, but there's a parameter on that about where you are, what's your contact information. Are you in Oklahoma County itself? If so, where? And if not, we'll make that explicitly clear. We won't lose the information that somebody from, like you said, Utah or Connecticut comes and puts in, but we will triage accordingly. I mean, you have our commitment. We'll triage that accordingly. At the ultimate day, Oklahoma County is a fiduciary on behalf of the citizens of Oklahoma County, residents of Oklahoma County, for these funds being used for them. So,
to that end, are there jurisdictions that have established an additional criteria that say if a nonprofit's requesting funds that they had to have been in existence for X number of years and have good financials, et cetera, to even?
Well, that's going to go back to how were they impacted by the pandemic? So if they didn't exist,
Well, right, obviously they didn't exist, but if they're a 1-year-old nonprofit,
I've not come across anything like
Okay.
that, but if
All right.
that were criteria that you wanted to incorporate, we could look at it.
we just have to show on the nonprofit end that they did suffer harm,
right, and
which can be defined in different ways.
And then as far as overview, it's still a recommendation from this board to the BOCC that we do the one-time $10 million allowance, confirming that allowance is for the county as they see fit or still under those 7 categories.
One of those 7 categories is revenue replacement. So
And it can be used for general government services. There are very few limitations on how that is
That was
obligated.
Category 6.
Yeah.
Well, outside of getting a application and IT up and running and ready, was there any other items we needed to review under this agenda item?
So I'll give you the standing, I'll give you language for the standing, and then you can begin to report back to us.
And we'll roll this. Our intention is once this happens, based on whatever deadline you all set, we'll just run this as a rolling process. If you set it for 2 months, if you set it for 3 months, if you set it for 2 weeks, whatever it is, we'll run it a roll, and then first in, first out in terms of our initial triage. Now, obviously, something may have to go here to the corner and sit while we get additional information, but we'll continue to run the process of looking at each one, mapping it against the criteria, and letting you all see, draft documents of these projects as they come in.
How,
Yep.
Rich, Dane, how quickly can you all, in working with them, get that form in a usable state where that we can begin to do the testing within the county environment?
I need items in the mic, please.
I think the best way to proceed would be to take the requirements that were in the attachment, give those to Mr. Weaver, and have him compare it to what we had in the CARES, see if there's a template that can be used from the CARES, and then shift that over to something that'll work with ARPA, give it to the consultant, see if it touches on everything, make sure that it's approved by the people who are going to be able to use it. And I think the best way to put it on is put it on as a testing internally only. So that's, on
Right.
InfoZone. So
Right.
it's internal only so that it can be refined. And then once it's determined, we can either put that on the webpage or somewhere separate if it needs to be there. That would be.
All right, and you all will develop that disclaimer language and the checkoff. Okay, all right.
And I would think Bob could do that within.
Probably not long. It didn't take
Yeah.
him long to build the CARES app.
Yeah.
A
Couple weeks.
or so, a couple
Yeah.
weeks. And that was when he was a one-man show.
We'll just,
so.
after our part's done, we'll just exchange information and get work.
Perfect.
Get to
Okay.
work on it.
Okay.
All right, so will they be, just ballparking here, a need to meet the 22nd or the 26th of April? And then with that caveat, what do you see as far as 30 April filing for last quarter will be similar to what we filed most recently?
I think it's going to be very similar. We're not going to be committing to, we're not going to be obligating funds in the meantime, except for revenue replacement. So, yeah, it'll look very similar to what you did in January.
And then in terms of the narrative portion of that, we'll be able to put down these 7 items. We're beginning the process of identifying and developing programs to respond to blah, 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 blah.
Absolutely. We could take, the
Yeah.
process we outlined here and convey that.
Okay.
Talk about, building the portal, all
All
of
of
those
that,
things.
perfect.
And build that out as a narrative. And put any deadlines you all have set, et cetera.
Okay.
Do you want that to reflect on an agenda for the 26th of April, or do you want to, and the reason I picked 26th April, that would allow us time if we take any action to recommend to the BOCC, which would be for the May 2nd meeting.
Yeah, that's good with me, Michael.
It's good with me.
Okay. Later today, I'll call a special for the 26th of April.
Okay.
All right, any last second thoughts?
None from us.
All right.
We got our marching orders.
Thank you both.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
And I think you'll be needed for the next executive session item as well.
All right, no further discussion on item 4. I entertain a motion to enter into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. Entertain a motion to return from executive session.
So moved.
Motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
With regard to item number 6, Chairman, I move that we would instruct the staff to proceed as discussed.
Second.
Motion and second. Proceed as discussed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any citizen participation today? Board comments, D1.
Thank you both for coming.
Oh, you're welcome. Oh, you meant those guys. All right. D3.
April is Child Abuse Prevention and Awareness Month. That's why we got the blue ribbons. Jamie was kind enough to give those to us. Thanks for coming.
Fair enough. And any new business before the policy and governance? See no other business before us.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion and
Second.
second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye.